Ellen G. White, one of the most influential leaders of the Adventist movement, emphasized in her writings the profound connection between physical health and spiritual well-being. She firmly believed that what we consume affects not only our bodies, but also our minds and spirits. In a world filled with quick and convenient food choices, Ellen White's warnings about the effects of food on spiritual discernment are more relevant today than ever before. For Ellen White, spiritual discernment wasn't an innate ability, but something we must actively cultivate. It is the ability to perceive spiritual truths, to hear God's voice clearly, and to understand His will for our lives. White knew that this capacity to clearly discern God's voice could be severely hindered by improper eating habits, which not only impair our physical health but also cloud our minds and hearts, making it difficult to connect with God. In today's world, where processed foods and fast food chains dominate, Ellen White calls us to reflect on our food choices. She understood that just as the body needs healthy foods to function optimally, the mind requires a proper diet that aids in clarity and serenity for spiritual engagement. Yet, too often, modern diets are filled with substances that excite our senses or are difficult to digest, preventing us from achieving the discernment necessary to hear God's voice. In a society rife with distractions and external stimuli, from our work environments to our digital screens, every food choice is an opportunity to nourish both our bodies and minds for a more balanced, focused life with God. Ellen White's counsel, therefore, urges us to recognize the impact of what we eat not only on our physical health, but on our spiritual clarity as well. Through adopting a simpler, cleaner diet, we can enhance our spiritual sensitivity and focus. As we explore the 7 foods Ellen White warned about, we should consider each one carefully, recognizing how it impacts both our health and our ability to connect spiritually. By choosing foods that promote health and clarity, we can deepen our relationship with God and sharpen our spiritual discernment in a world that constantly seeks to distract us from His presence. Ellen G. White was a staunch advocate for a vegetarian diet, believing it to be much healthier for the body and the mind. She wrote extensively about the dangers of consuming meat, particularly in relation to mental and spiritual health. According to White, eating meat, especially heavy, fatty meats, could cloud the mind and impair emotional balance, making it more difficult to hear God's voice. In her writings, White explained that meat not only overburdens the digestive system, but also creates a sluggish, heavy feeling in the body that affects one's mood and mental clarity. Heavy meats, particularly those high in fat, are harder for the body to digest, which can lead to physical fatigue and mental lethargy. This lethargy impedes the ability to focus, to pray effectively, and to study the scriptures with clarity. White observed that people who regularly consumed meat appeared more prone to distraction and irritability. In her writings, she emphasized that consuming foods that are easier to digest, like fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, contributed to a clearer mind and a more peaceful disposition, both of which are essential for spiritual growth and connection. According to White, a plant-based diet nurtures both physical vitality and mental alertness, thereby enhancing one's ability to engage in spiritual matters deeply. Furthermore, White believed that the meat consumed in her time was often unhealthy, lacking in proper preparation and containing harmful substances, which could lead to health problems such as digestive disorders or even more serious diseases. These physical ailments, in turn, could hinder one's spiritual growth. By choosing a vegetarian diet, White believed individuals could experience better digestion, more energy, and greater spiritual sensitivity. Thus, White's counsel wasn't just about health, it was a call to improve our spiritual sensitivity by caring for the body. When the body is less burdened by hard-to-digest foods, it becomes easier to focus on spiritual matters, discern God's voice, and live a life in tune with His will. Refined sugar, a common ingredient in many modern diets, is another food item that Ellen White cautioned against. She observed that sugar, especially in its processed form, could have detrimental effects on both physical health and spiritual clarity. According to White, consuming excessive amounts of sugar can create physical imbalances that directly affect our mental and emotional well-being, thereby numbing our spiritual discernment. White understood that sugar creates a quick energy spike, followed by a crash, leaving the body and mind in a state of fatigue. These fluctuations in energy can lead to irritability, mood swings, and a general sense of unsteadiness. For White, these emotional and physical imbalances hindered one's ability to maintain focus on God and could reduce the effectiveness of prayer and Bible study. The overstimulation caused by sugar can make the mind more susceptible to distractions, preventing the peaceful, steady focus required for spiritual growth. In her book, Counsels on Diet and Foods, White emphasized that refined sugar is a stimulant, much like caffeine, and that consuming it regularly can create a dependence on quick sources of energy. This dependency detracts from the ability to remain spiritually grounded and clear. Just as sugar artificially boosts energy in the body, it can also lead to a mind that is constantly seeking the next high or distraction, which is far from the stillness needed for prayer and reflection. White also noted that excessive sugar consumption could contribute to physical ailments like obesity and diabetes, which can affect overall well-being. When the body is unwell, the mind and spirit are also impacted, leading to a loss of mental clarity and an inability to discern the things of God clearly. Furthermore, she warned that sugar creates a longing for instant gratification, making it more difficult to develop patience and self-control, virtues essential for spiritual growth. For White, avoiding refined sugar was not just a health recommendation, but a spiritual necessity. She believed that a balanced, whole foods-based diet, one that minimizes sugar and emphasizes natural sweetness from fruits and vegetables, helps maintain a calm, clear mind that is more attuned to God's voice. Ellen White was deeply concerned about the effects of coffee and tea on both physical health and spiritual discernment. Although these beverages were popular in her time and still are today, she cautioned against their consumption due to their stimulating effects, particularly the caffeine they contain. White recognized that while caffeine might provide a temporary feeling of alertness, it ultimately leads to exhaustion, irritability, and a loss of spiritual clarity. She wrote that caffeine, found in coffee and tea, overstimulates the nervous system, creating an artificial sense of energy. This stimulation disrupts the natural rhythm of the body and mind, making it difficult to maintain peace and focus, two essential qualities for effective prayer and spiritual discernment. While caffeine might provide a burst of energy, it is followed by a crash that leaves the person feeling tired, anxious, or distracted. White also observed that those who relied on coffee and tea to stay alert often struggled with a lack of mental and emotional stability. Their moods could fluctuate rapidly, and they were more likely to experience restlessness, making it harder for them to engage in deep, reflective prayer or to hear the voice of God. This constant cycle of stimulation and depletion drained their energy and made them more vulnerable to distractions. Moreover, White's concern wasn't just about the immediate effects of coffee and tea, but also about the long-term dependence that can develop. People who consumed these beverages regularly became reliant on them for energy, which led to an overall weakened state of physical and spiritual health. In her writings, White encouraged believers to avoid caffeine and instead opt for natural alternatives, such as herbal teas, which would not overstimulate the body and mind, but instead promote calm and tranquility. Ultimately, Ellen White's advice on coffee and tea wasn't tea simply about avoiding stimulants for the sake of physical health. It was about creating an environment where the mind could remain clear and undistracted, thus enhancing one's ability to hear and discern God's voice.